Thank you for coming to hear my friend Alejandro. He is here with his wife, Jackie, who is in my Spanish book group, and his son and daughter-in-law. Yes, I was talking to Alejandro at a party and realized, oh my gosh, this is really interesting. He's lived everywhere, done so many things. And I asked him, would you like to give a talk to our little group? And he's very graciously said yes. Alejandro Azcona is a civil engineer with 2 master's degrees in hydraulics from the Universidad Nacional Autonoma de Mexico and the University of Iowa. He has been project manager and director of projects in the water treatment sector, designing and building treatment plants for industrial and municipal purposes in countries all over the world. Besides the U.S. and Mexico, he has lived in Chile and India and has worked in Oman, Malaysia, Colombia, Argentina, and Panama. He and his family moved to Denver from India about 5 years ago to work in the oil and gas sector. After 2 years, they went to Casper, Wyoming as director of engineering involved in the manufacturing of electromechanical equipment for the oil and gas sector. Currently, he is a consultant in the water and oil sector in the U.S. and abroad. So help me welcome Alejandro.
Good evening, everybody. I was thinking that engineers are really bad when they're dealing with social sciences and communication, and tonight is not going to be an exception. I hope you. I'm sorry.
We'll be the judges.
Yeah, you will be. So I don't have to turn on. So I prepare something very basic knowledge that I like to share with you. It's not something very deep in detail. So it's more on the social or historical side of the water of water. So I prepare something that I hope you will like. So the importance of water in civilization. So it's a brief history is the title of this small talk. So we can realize that through history, so the management of water resources has been very important for societies that have succeeded, and when they first settled along rivers, and then how they evolved. So basically depended upon the way they managed the water resources available. So water has been managed throughout history for several purposes, like drinking water, irrigation, flood control, navigation, and power. I'm sure not for fire control, but we're dealing with that now. So, but in the old civilizations, those were the main topics for water management. So, but as I said on the bottom of this slide, so many challenges ahead remain to be solved. So what I will cover this in this presentation. So I will go very quickly. I will talk very quickly about Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, which all these 4 civilizations share something in common, and then Rome. And then I will talk a little bit about the main challenges we face today regarding water. And then I would like to share something about my professional experience. So the main or the common features that these 4 civilizations share are the following: that they were established along large flowing navigable rivers, so they had to deal with flood control, irrigation, water supply. So these rivers were like the names of the Tigris and Euphrates in the Mesopotamia, the Nile, I think there's a misspell there, in Egypt, the Indus River in the subcontinent, Indian subcontinent, and the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers in China. So these old civilizations, they were agricultural societies that, because of the fact that they were settled along the rivers, so they were able to develop the irrigation techniques. And one thing that is common to all these civilizations as well is that probably this word will remind you something that we're living probably, but they were hierarchical, centralized, and authoritarian states. So by holding the power in society, they were able to have armies of slaves or soldiers or people to accomplish these very complex water works. So what I'm saying here is that the power and social organizations depended on the concentrated control of the water supply. So the more they were specialized, the more knowledgeable they were in the water management of their resources, the more powerful the societies may be. So in this slide, I like to depict, the 4 sites for the Egypt, the Nile, so the Mesopotamia with the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. India, the subcontinent, because it's so big, so vast that sometimes it's called a subcontinent, with the Indus and Ganges rivers, and the mainland China with the Yellow River and the Yangtze. So these are called the 4 old world river valley cultures. So with the rivers, what happens is the way the civilizations evolved, they evolved from rivers, establishing along the rivers. They developed agriculture. Because they have developed agriculture, then the population started growing and growing in such a way that the cities were built and created. And then because of the cities, there was a place for people to share ideas like we're doing tonight, people to trade things, to simply live together. And then because of this big population, then it came the specialization. So the specialization in several areas led to hierarchy. So by being specialized, the society became a bit, I would say, layered. So because of that, the hierarchy played a big role in these river societies or old civilizations. So I say here that we can find evidence of water management in these old civilizations, because they had to deliver drinking water to the population. So we will talk a little bit about the canals and aqueducts. The canals in the Mesopotamia and aqueducts in Rome, in the Roman Empire. So they had at the same time to dispose of wastewater. So it was not only as it is today, not only a matter of getting water supply, but also how to dispose of the wastewater because of healthy and risky factors. So also they have to develop the water, the agriculture. So that's why they built dams, they built canals, they built water lifting devices to develop the agriculture through irrigation. They use the waterways for transportation, and also recently for hydropower. So in Mesopotamia, these 2 rivers helped to create, I would say, the world's most precocious large civilization. So they had developed the wedge-shaped cuneiform first written language. So they created the first large cities, and they also developed the very sophisticated water lifting and irrigation technologies, and they developed the wheel, and they were very aggressive, and they developed a very expansive and I would say fearful empires as well. So Mesopotamia was located in this region, which is basically Iraq today. So the 2 rivers are there, the Euphrates on the south and the Tigris on the north. So it's a very complex area from several aspects even today. They had success through water engineering, and then they had several societies or civilizations that established in the same place, in the same region, throughout several time periods. In summer, 4th and 3rd millennia, Akkad, nearly 2300 years before Christ, Babylon 1800 before Christ, Assyria, and the Persians around 500 before Christ. So in summer, it's a fact that the urban revolution started. So the cities stimulated what I was talking about a couple of minutes ago, and they developed what I already mentioned. And then Darius and Herhes, they introduced the lifting wheel to Egypt. So, but it was not such a beauty always. So they had a lot of problems because nature has a, they pass a bill, a factor. So deforestation and salinization occurred, and this is what is a recent picture, but we can see how the problems can arise if the resources are not properly managed. The canals were developed in Mesopotamia.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Those are just big piles of salt, basically?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
Yes, just salt. Yeah. So what happens is that if the water is not properly managed, then the salt is settles down, and then it's a death for the soil, because there's no way to say cure the soil once it gets this level of salinization. So the canals were developed in Mesopotamia. It comes the word for a Semitic word meaning to dig. These canals, they deliver groundwater by gravity. So it's very interesting because this technology was developed almost 2,000 years before Christ. So, and some of them still work and running today. So this is the water table, so groundwater. So the water well was digged first, and then they dig several access shafts for construction of the canal. So the canal was on the ground, so they had access to these access shafts, and then the canal intercrossed or captures the water, and then with a small slope, the water flowed to the irrigated land. So it's a very it's a beauty in terms of engineering. It's very simple, very complex to do, but the principle is very simple, as you can see. But when you think that these devices had like 2,000 or 3,000 years, so you can imagine what the level of engineering they should have had. So this is one of the Mesopotamian cities. In this case, it's Ur. It's 1700 before Christ. So, and these cities were supplied water with these techniques of the canals.
I thought BC usually is before Caesar.
No, well,
I mean, just
Good try, Jeff. Good try.
sorry.
it's the same time as
You're right. Took notes. Then we move on to Upper and Lower Egypt. So in Egypt, so they have the beauty of having the Nile. So the Egyptian civilization was divided in the Lower and Upper Egypt. The lower closer to the Mediterranean, the upper further south. So the Herodotus, the Greek historian, he called the gift of the Nile to the Egyptian civilization. So the Egyptians took advantage of being established on the Nile because the Nile was fully predictable. It was like a perfect machine. So they came up with the engineering to understand and to take advantage of the flow of the minerals and laws that the river was carrying. So they were blessed, for saying so, for establishing along the Nile. So they developed these nilometers that they were showing to the tax people by the time the water levels, and depending upon the level of the water, they charged taxes. So probably the Egyptians didn't invent the taxes, but they were there from those times. So, and they were also witness for telling the water managers when to break down the dikes to flow the land and for preparing for irrigation. So they invented or developed several water uplifting devices, like the ones on top, very simple, and then they developed what is called the Archimedes screw. So it's a basic like screw that takes the water and by moving it. So it takes the water out and up. So it's very simple and very old device. And they also developed this water wheel where the animals were rounding the circular tracks, and then they took out the water and then took the water from one place to the canals and took it to several irrigation lands. So the highest specialization they got is they built the pyramids, but also at the same time they were very good architects, engineers for sure, craftsmen, and even artists. Now we're moving to India. So India is, as I mentioned before, it's a place where it's called like Indian subcontinent because of the size. So they developed these old civilizations, ideas, techniques that were they were used later on for their followers. So in India, we have this the setup of the rivers. They have, let's see, well, we have the, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra River here, and the Indus River. So in the Indus River on the west, which is now Pakistan, two civilizations were established around 2500 before
Common Era.
Before Caesar.
Common Era, BCE. There you go, that's a good one.
And so these two civilizations were called Arapaha and Mohenjo-daro. So by that time they established there, and they were the basis of the old civilization that was developed further south. So we can see some pictures from how important is water of the rivers in India, the early civilizations, and even today. So the Ganges River flows from, as I was mentioned, from Himalayas and flows across northern India. And then the Brahmaputra River flows into the Bay of Bengal. So they go together to the Bay of Bengal in the east part. And then we have the monsoons, which is a phenomenon which is also a blessing but can also be very dangerous. The monsoon poses environmental challenges to this part of the world, I would say, even today, because the yearly floods are unpredictable. So there's no way, like it was possible in Egypt in the Nile, to be fully predictable in this part of the world. So the floods were completely unpredictable and very dangerous. And they are still today. So the rivers sometimes even change course. And the monsoons brought unpredictable cycles because of what I was saying, of wet and dry seasons. Then in the Indus Valley, we found some samples of writing. So based on my knowledge, which is not very well developed on this area, I think this type of written is not deciphered yet today. So here we have a photograph of a great bath in Mohenjo-daro, one of the first places I showed you before in the west, northwest of India. So it's believed that this was a site for a great bath. So it's one of the earliest examples of this type of civil common life. And then they use these places for storage. So we can see that water was stored in this area. But I'm talking about 2500 before Caesar. So the region was invaded by the Aryans. So the Aryans destroyed everything around 500 before Caesar. And then by that time, they had built a new Indian civilization, and they continued the development, but they are believed to came from this part of Asia. So it's not very well known, but it's a fact that they established there and they conquered the Indus civilization in Mohenjo-Daro. So then China. China, it's fair to say that the Chinese, even though they were a bit different from the other civilizations, they were the water management achievements were by far better and more advanced than the previous or the other civilizations. In China, we can see the most precocious pre-industrial civilization. They start in, it was something interesting that happened in China because originally they didn't settle along a big river. Originally they were settled in the semi-arid north, and but there the weather was extreme, very cold, very hot in summer, and prone to droughts. So they changed the location after several years. So we can see here the Yellow River on the north and the Yangtze River on the south. So they established later on from here, they moved eastward from they were established originally. So as we know, there were several dynasties in China. These are the main dynasties. It doesn't make sense to go through them, but just to show you that some of them lasted for 500, 700 years. And they developed along the river, because of the Yellow River, they developed big cities, and they were able to manage the river, although the Yellow River was terrible because it was unpredictable, and it caused a lot of damages with floods. So it's the nickname that it had is China's Sorrow. So one of the major things or major accomplishments from the engineering standpoint is that they developed the Grand Canal. So it's a canal, artificial canal, going south, north from next to Shanghai, I would say, so up to what is Beijing today. So it's a canal, man-built, completed in 604 on this era. So the canal extends for 1,100 miles, which is a pretty big size. So I would say it's one of the stellar engineering works of mankind. So it had it was 10 to 30 feet deep and up to 100 feet wide. So you can imagine, but this time the mankind had enough knowledge to accomplish this type of works, which is amazing, I would say. So, and it's one of the beauties of the world, but I would say has not been very well known. And I think it's worth a visit there, and also to came to know how they were able to develop these technologies to build this type of canal. But it had 60 bridges, 24 locks, so you can imagine. And they were able to lift the boats up to 5 feet in a pond lock. So the same principle as we have in Panama for the canal. The Panama Canal is only 100 years old. So the Chinese had that technology more than 1,800 years ago. So after that, you know, China was conquered by the Mongols, and then they were expulsed like 100 years afterwards. But China all of a sudden shut down, closed its doors, even though they had a lot of development in the shipping and in the water technologies. They decided, it's one of the mysteries in history, why they decided not to move forward with their conquest or with expanding their power, but they shut down, they closed the door, basically in 1433. So there are a lot of theories why that try to explain why they did that, and most of or many of the knowledge and technology that were developed, like the Chinese, were lost because of this decision. So, and the isolation lasted for almost 4 centuries. So, and then they were the British there, and then they started the wars and all that. But for almost 4 centuries, China was completely isolated. So they had the Silk Road. So they were using the Silk Road to trade merchandises from the east to the west, and they came up to the Mediterranean. So many great inventions and merchandises were traded along the Silk Road, but before China closed down its borders. Rome. So Rome was different, as I was mentioning before, to the first 4, because Rome, even though it was established in the Tiber River, so the Tiber River was not as important or as big as the rivers we have been talking about. So, but the equivalent to a big river for Rome was the Mediterranean. So they were the first power to control, to dominate the Mediterranean, and for several centuries, from I would say 6 or 7 centuries, 3 before Caesar and 3 more or 4 after Caesar. So, and this is like a parallel or a reminiscence of the ancient civilizations controlling the great rivers. The Romans controlled the Mediterranean. So Rome was a pretty big empire. So it covered a lot of extension from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf, North Africa to the British Isles, and then from Central Europe through the Balkans. And they invented the concrete, not the concrete that we know today, for sure, but the concrete, this adding water to heated limestone helped them build the beauties that we know today, aqueducts and the cities that they built. Basically, they were using this type of concrete. They invented that around 200 years before Caesar. So the aqueducts, so they were very good on aqueducts, and these are jewels of engineering as well. So they reduced basically the time of individuals, usually women, spend obtaining daily water, and then they also built the first large public baths that became a model for the social life. So this is like a record of, I would say, 8 or 9 main aqueducts in Rome, the years that they were built, and the length in meters. So it's 421 kilometers, which is about 270 miles. So, and you can see the years they were built. So it's amazing the length they had for aqueducts. And then also they were dealing with different type of altitudes. So they were very, very good engineers. So we can see here 2 aqueducts joining back and forth in southeast Rome. So this is a paint from 1680. We can see this aqueduct in Segovia in Spain, so as it is today. And we can see many of these remainings in many cities in Europe, even in Britain. So, and they also developed technologies for getting rid of wastewater. So they built what is called in Latin the cloaca maxima, which is the main sewer. And then we can see in one of the old paints the way it was depicted, and we can see a recent photograph of the cloaca maxima today in Rome. So it's amazing how long these engineering works have lasted. So Constantine transferred the capital to New Rome, renamed Constantinople in his honor in 330 of this era. And then the Western Roman Empire's final demise was about late 4th century, because it was invaded by the Gothic and barbarian tribes. So, and then after Rome, say, for saying so, was gone, then Venice became took his place in the Mediterranean, and Venice was a very powerful nation till end of 1797, when it was conquered by Napoleon. So a brief summary. I'm coming to an end now. So we can say that between 5,500 and 5,000 years ago, so large-scale irrigation in the Middle East, in the Indus River and the Little River were developed. Around 4,000 years ago, rainwater cultivable lands, the first ones were developed. 3,000 years ago, so the construction of canals that we saw and the first aqueducts took place. So you can see how all these structures are, and some of them are still in place and it's even working. I've seen some of them in the Middle East, and it's amazing. And 2,500 years ago, transport canals that connected natural waterways started in China. 2,000 years ago, the invention of the water wheel. 1,000 years ago, the water wheel applied to more industrial applications. 500 years ago, when the New World was discovered, I would say the global distance barrier is defeated by Europeans by sailing in the open oceans. So only 500 years ago. 200 years ago, the water wheel powering the first factories, and 20, 30 years afterwards, in the end of the 18th century, the invention of the steam engine by James Watt. So we changed the history by creating the Industrial Revolution. So all these major accomplishments were made because of dealing with water, knowing having the technology to deal with this. So the big challenges we're facing. So I would say how to avoid social and political conflicts arising from water scarcity. So after all this big civilization, after all these accomplishments that they have had, so the question is how we can move on and avoid social and political conflicts, and because of the water is a limited resource. So how to respond to the ever-increasing demand of fresh water in an environmentally sustainable manner, providing water to each and everyone as a human right. Are we capable of solving the challenge with all the scientific and technological tools available? I'm sure we can. So I want to share just 2 more minutes of something of my personal experience, and then just trying to reply to this question. I'm sure we have the technology, the means, the knowledge, but what happens sometimes, or most of the times, is that we lack the willingness, the political willingness to do things and to solve problems. My professional experience in India, I worked in Bangalore in the local language, which is the capital of the state of Karnataka. The city has, when we were there, probably now there are a couple of more millions, 9 million. It was by then the fastest growing city in Asia, which is not something minor. So I was working in a water supply and sanitation project funded by the Japanese government, and the project was about $800 million. So it was a big project, and I had the fortune, I would say so, of being there. And then we were supplying water from the Kaveri River, located like 80 miles south of the city. It had a water pipeline 7 feet diameter, so it's big pipes, mild seal, the material. We built pumping stations, treatment plants, storage tanks, and distribution network within the city. So I just want to show you some photographs here. So we can see here how we were building the pipelines. Those are big, right? Then we were working as a team. So you can see working in another country, in a different environment. It's not so easy, but it's very rewarding. So to overcome adversity, I'm sure working as a team, we can solve any problem that we have. You can see the very hard working conditions, but in spite of that fact, we were able to provide adequate solutions to people in need. So in the very poor areas of the city, and changing their life forever. So we don't want this type of water supply for the people. We want these high-tech solutions for the people. And then Benjamin Franklin said that when the well is dry, we learn the worth of water. So, and this is what I wanted to share with you, and I'm sure it's possible, and we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're willing to take some questions, aren't you?
Sure. I will be able to answer. Yes.
Well, I actually have a lot of questions, so.
One by one.
But, yeah. Well, so like, you know that in Egypt, the flooding there is really predictable.
It is.
And in places like Mesopotamia, the flooding is unpredictable. How do you think that affected their social structure and religious beliefs?
Oh, it's a very interesting question because, well, I'm not an expert, but you know, I'm just going to tell you what I think. So when you have, from engineering standpoint, something that you can predict, so it's easier to manage because you know the cycle or you know the peak or whatever it's called. Then you have the I would say the blessing of having something that you know, and you will know how it behaves in the future. So, and by having so, you were able to plan and to allocate resources, and you know, this is a beauty that is very uncommon, I would say so. So in the way it affects, you can imagine living in fear, because you never know if you know the water, the river is going to flood and make your town disappear. Even today we have this type of, so you can imagine 5,000, 3,000 years ago. So, but whereas if you have something that is more predictable, then it gives comfort, gives confidence, even everything is politics, right? So even the politician may say, oh yeah, we're taking care of the river. That was not true, but I'm sure they were saying things that are not true, but help them to keep the society as a unity. Sure. Sure.
How do you think global warming is going to affect the water supply?
Well, I would say it's not going to affect. It's affecting already. So it's very complex, and I'm not an expert, but I can tell that you need to be an expert to realize that something is going on, that things are changing. We have very unusual, even here at home in this part of the world, we have noticed several changes in the normal, regular weather trend. So there's no simple answer to that question, but I'm sure something's going on, and it's very uncertain, and we have to take action. So we don't know probably what's the best way to deal with this problem, but we know that there are several steps, several ways to tackle this problem because it's very complex. What I can say is that the more we delay taking the decisions, the worse will be.
And if we don't know what the effect is going to be, how do we know what actions to take?
Well, we know. We don't understand very well the details of the, but we know it's like when you have a sick person. You know he's sick because you see the symptoms. You don't know probably what causes the disease, but you see that the person is sick and you have to do something, right? But the details probably we don't know yet. But anyway, we in spite of this lack of knowledge, we can take action now. So now I think now is the time. Today is Earth Day, by the way, so we can take some actions at the domestic level. Yes.
So I know it's supposed to be pretty dangerous to just drink water out of a stream or anything like that without treating it or boiling it. Were they facing the same kind of contaminants we have to deal with now, or how did they address making the water drinkable?
It's interesting because I didn't talk about water quality, which is like I would say like another topic. Because here I was more focused on quantity,
Yeah.
how the supply. But it's interesting what you're saying because it puts us in another perspective, in the perspective of water quality, which is different. So obviously they didn't have the contaminants, the chemicals that we have today. But anyway, they had very bad pollutants by the time, and I'm sure that many people died, and we don't even know how many. So there are several like I wouldn't say secrets, but unknowns that how many civilizations disappeared, vanished, even south of the border in Mexico. The Mayas, why they disappeared, we don't know as a fact why they did that. But there are some theories that they say that probably because the water was poisoned or the water quality or something really bad happened. So I would say by trial and error. So and the error meant that many people died, but I don't know exactly what happened, but it's a very interesting approach, the water quality.
I know some places used alcohol to make the water more drinkable. You put a little alcohol in the water and it would be better to drink that way. I know there's cultures that use
Sure,
alcohol.
it's like, that reminds me like, I always like, cooking. So I always think how they came up with this very nice dish. What is the history behind this, nice, whatever it is. So I'm sure many people died, because they were eating the fungi and then, so I think that the same applies to this type of reasoning. We don't know how they were, well, I don't know, but I'm sure most people in the area, in the experts in there, they don't know how this trial and error test run for how many years, how many people died, how many civilizations disappeared. We don't know, but I'm sure after several tries, we came to something good, and that's what I can say. That's my very basic reasoning on that. But I don't know. But it's very interesting, the topic. Yes.
Yeah. So like with global warming, we currently have a reservoir system where it sort of relies on fairly regular amounts of rain, snow. But I think like we're fairly sure that in the future there's going to be longer periods of drought and then possibly more flooding. And so with the reservoir system, you lose a lot of water through evaporation.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, what sort of technologies would allow you to not, or allow for there not to be as much, or to allow more efficient use of water?
You mean when the water is in a dam? When water is stored or in a natural reservoir?
Yeah. Well, it just.
Well, what I can tell you is that, and linking this question to the global warming,
Yeah.
so we've seen that, we built reservoirs, say, 40, 50 years ago, based on, the current trends and, climate patterns by that time. And because of those trends, we designed and built, dams and many waterworks. Today, these parameters have changed. So that means that some, or I wouldn't say most, but some of the dams, for instance, are useless now because the weather changed. And also because of, they're getting old as we are. So the public works or the waterworks are getting old, and the dams suffer from, when the soil starts accumulating on the bottom. But that's one thing I would say natural. But when the weather patterns change, that changed the whole thing. It changed the design. But we have the works there. So most of them are useless. Some of our dams are dry, getting drier. Just take a look in California, out in summer. Some of them are on the contrary. You can go east, and then you can see floods, and you know, and we have these dams, for instance, have been in work for, I would say, 40, 50 years, and they were working very well, but something happened that, you know, this type of, and I'm sure it's related to global warming.
Well, so how can we alter our water management infrastructure to use water more effectively for the situation that?
Well, that's a key question, but we have to understand what's going on.
Okay.
And then once you understand and you can predict, then you can design, size your works, and then, you know, build them. But if you don't understand very well, which is, you know, we don't have a perfect knowledge of what's going on in the atmosphere, for instance. But even though we have been able to build what we have seen here, what we see today, even without having a perfect knowledge, there are many unknowns even today with the climate, for instance. We cannot predict climate in the next 15 days. We cannot. You just watch Weather Channel. Yeah. But, you know, even though we have been able to come up with solutions.
Okay, we probably have time for one more question. Anybody?
I'm a funny scientist. I've been doing some of what he's been doing for the last 30 years. And Dr. Michael Gallant's Director of Advanced Studies in Boulder, we were going to get a Boulder ice cap pipeline. So as the ice melted, some of the purest water on the planet, and take it into Utah, Arizona, and Nevada to create the new agriculture, because that land has never had the adequate amount of water. There's stupid little pieces of stuff that have been stuffed into the Congress that would make a really delightful change. And every one of you here, if you make communications and ask for things to change, that's what makes them change. Your approach is different than my approach, different than his. But collectively together, we can make this thing happen. And I think it'd be pretty exciting to have a big pipeline, not carrying oil, but carrying the purest water on the planet down to 3 or 4 major states: California, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
But the Colorado River does now carry water from here down to those states. And that's why they said they weren't allowing in Colorado to have rain collecting. You know, they just approved that recently because they weren't allowing it because they didn't want the water not to go into the river so that it wouldn't go down.
That's where politics came to play, because, you know, because of political decisions, they have a committed certain amount of water, and then they cannot use it at home. They just leave the flow pass through, and but together as a society, we can achieve many, many things. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.